We did some research around the last 2 years of our projects, and we were trying to understand the themes of why did certain rebrands turn out to be super successful with really great outcomes for the business, and why did other ones maybe not seem so successful or produce the same results.
You frame yourself as being, the agency of the South, and a lot of your work is very connected to Atlanta, where you're based. Like why is that sort of locality so important and so sort of fundamental to the work that you do and the brands that you build?
We just think branding places and businesses and nonprofits in Atlanta has a very emotional connection to who we are and where we live and to our families and to more than just a job. And we find a lot of value in that. I find a lot of value in that, driving around the city and having my kids point out logos that I've designed or created. And so there is a sort of a connectedness to it that we really like. There's functional benefits where, pre-COVID, there was a lot of value in being in the same room with our clients and really understanding their culture and their business and their marketplace and their customer, and proximity played a big role in that. That's obviously shifted a bit now, but we're still very much connected to the city, and we want to see the businesses that operate here thrive and excel. And it pains me when really talented designers in Atlanta move to a big market, New York or San Francisco, and there's the pursuit of I have to go there where these big opportunities are, which is true. I want to see those opportunities remain in a city like Atlanta, because I think we can compete creatively with all of those other groups that are in these major cities, if not do it more effectively for businesses that are more located or relevant to the Southeast. I love to throw this brand under the bus a little bit, but it's kind of like actually a customer of, there's a bank called SunTrust, pretty big bank in the Southeast on the East Coast. And they merged with another bank, BBT, and they needed a new name, and they hired Interbrand. I think it was Interbrand out of New York to come up with a new name. And they rebranded SunTrust, which was very beloved in Atlanta. The Braves Stadium is called SunTrust Park. My personal bank account is through SunTrust. Our business bank account is through SunTrust. Really, really good brand reputation. I know several people that work there. They do great things on the nonprofit funding side. So great reputation. Well, they rebranded to Truist, was the name, Truist. And they're sort of still going through this, move to eventually get rid of SunTrust and become Truist. And people in Atlanta hated the name Truist. It felt altruistic. It felt like you're the best bank. You're like this ideal state. You're not this sort of down south, relatable bank that I've been with for years. Anyway, all that to say, I think it was a big miss. And I can empathize with the group out of New York naming it, because to name a bank at this day and age to get a .com is difficult. You're going to have a fabricated name. I get that. But I just feel like there was some tonal misses with that would not have been the case if it would have been done by a firm who better understood the cultural context of SunTrust.
So often when clients go and rebrand, they often forget the context out of which they came, which is really important. And it's almost what formed that company. And I think often, you talk that you work at that moment when companies have almost reached a point where it's been kind of, we've been cobbling it together, or, we've been sort of making do with what we have. And now we've reached the point that we want to kind of click into that next gear and push up to that next level. I think it's really important for people to remember context and the people that got them there. And there's nothing wrong with projecting forward and building a bigger brand and occupying a larger space. But I think, when you tone deaf to where you've come from, it often can be quite a dangerous, from a relationship perspective. Let's talk about if someone was wanting to rebrand. They've got this company, they've built it to a point, and they feel that their clothing doesn't fit them so well anymore, and they need this thing. Like, what are the things that make a brand? Like, when you go through this process, what are you looking for to to pull out for these companies, and what do you think the brand does for them as a business, so that they don't potentially make some of the mistakes that we've just talked about?
Well, the first thing that we look for is trying to understand the essence. What is the most compelling, unique truth about that business? And we ask two big picture fundamental questions that we want to answer. And it is important to answer those through the lens of the audience or the customer, and not just through the operational mindset within the leadership of the organization. I think that's definitely a trap that people can fall into. Some assumptions can be made, but those two questions are: what is our unique contribution to the marketplace? What's really differentiated about what we do? And then what does our audience need? What does our audience really need? And where those two things overlap, where we have a unique contribution and what our audience needs, that's the beginning point for understanding that truth and that essence and that position to build the narrative around. So validating that through audience research is really important. Talking to customers, having an immersive experience of feeling the customer feeling firsthand is really important. And sometimes organizations say, we don't need that. We know what it is. It's this, and this. And that might be true. They might have a good sense or their finger on the pulse, but they also might be missing something that's incredibly valuable about what they do because they're so close to it. So, really defining first and answering those questions, we call that being radically relevant. What is our sort of radical side and what is our relevant side? And let's build a narrative around both of those. Let's be radically relevant. And once you have that clear and leadership is aligned around that truth, then you can start to build the narrative from a really solid foundation into the creative. So you can think about, okay, what's the right brand voice based on our radical relevance? What's the right look and feel based on our radical relevance? What is the right mark based on our radical relevance? And you can understand also the amount of change that's needed based on, okay, so let's say an organization was positioned for 10 years around X, Y, and Z, but now they've drastically changed what that radical relevance is. So we probably need to drastically change our visual identity as well. We can gauge the amount of change needed based on the amount of change within that position of that essence for the brand itself. So once you get into the creative, you've got to be able to anchor it back to some strategic foundation to make sure you're creating something that objectively makes sense and isn't just about your subjective likes or dislikes. And then you have to find the right way to execute and bring that to life out in the marketplace.
A rebrand doesn't have to be extreme. If your positioning is not like jumping too far, it could be the right decision to just modernize or refresh or tighten up. That could be a good choice if your positioning shifts. But if your positioning has radically jumped and your service offering is radically jumped, then it does necessitate quite a big visual shift, because that's the signal that people will notice and then be like, what's going on here? And you go, well, I'm glad you've asked. We've actually changed as a company and we have new products, and now you're in that sort of conversation driven by your brand.
A lot of times graphic designers or those in the design profession, we're sort of relegated just to the visual side. But at the end of the day, if a brand really wants to make their identity meaningful, they need to deliver on whatever the promise is. So whatever that radical relevance is, whatever the promise is, yes, we'll create something beautiful that connects back to it. We'll create some compelling messaging, but you've got to deliver on it. Yeah. So let's talk about what that experience is, and let's figure out ways that you are operationalizing these promises so that you actually deliver it. Because putting lipstick on a pig, giving you a vein makeover, but then you don't actually change, that's a big miss, and that's a waste of an investment. And one thing that I see also that can result in less of an impact from an effort of a rebrand is, if an organization is coming to us to help them reestablish their visual verbal identity, and they're not satisfied with what is currently in place. What currently in place is a result of the behaviors and the values of that internal culture, right? So they come to us to change it, and we present things in a PDF that look beautiful, and we cast a vision for a color palette, typography, layout, new language, new brand voice, new positioning. We sort of show them this ideal version of themselves, And then they then go and take those learnings and those beliefs, and they implement them with that same internal team that made decisions that led them to a place that was dissatisfied. We see that sometimes where our work is implemented and the original vision is not cast or is not seen, because there is a culture within creative teams that if that doesn't actually shift or change, you're not going to see the full potential of that identity. And I think that the answer to that is you have to make sure creative teams understand the new brand and the identity. They understand the spirit of what you're trying to create, not the letter of the law. We're no longer in, the logo has to always go here and we have this header. Yeah, this is the grid that you can always follow. They have to be inspired by the visual identity. They have to understand how they can push it, what is most important in creating different materials. And if they don't feel empowered to implement those things, they're going to feel constrained to the rules of the guidelines, and it will eventually go back to whatever was dissatisfying at the beginning.
The clients need to understand that they need to involve their teams in this process when they're pulling in an outsider, because sometimes they can feel threatened or not understand, or or feel like something really kind of basic has been missed in the process. And that's where the entropy sets in. That's where it starts to unravel the second it's launched into the company. So I think creatives need to step up a bit to be more responsible with how their work is delivered and landed and understood. And I think clients need to be more accepting that, yes, you might be the leader, but ultimately the people who implement this thing have to come on this journey, because if they don't understand, they're not going to be able to pick that baton up and run with it.
And I found that one really simple, easy way to address that is to just give a creative team space and a voice, either in the process or in understanding these new guidelines, maybe that are associated with the rebrand. Just give them some space to voice concerns, to voice appreciation, to voice anything. A lot of times they're just completely left out of the process, and they're mandated with, a 200-page PDF or digital guidelines. If you just give them a little space, it's very meaningful and very helpful. One of the findings was the profile of the leader on the client side. So the right type of leader for a brand change is someone who is decisive. So they're able to make decisions, and yet at the same time, they want a collaborative discussion, and they want input, and they want feedback. And they also are willing to listen to their agency partner. But we found that those leaders that are willing to be brought to a decision point and say, okay, everyone, we're going to go this direction because X, Y, and Z, and we believe in this, while at the same time saying, okay, here we are. I want to hear feedback. Ross, what do you think? What does everyone else think? And they're very inclusive in that process, and they're willing to trust the experts in the room. That's a unique combination for a leader, but I think that's the key ingredient for stories that we hear about where there's really tremendous success from a rebrand, and stories that we hear about that are more in that fail category.